Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you all for joining us for another evening of the Frames program. We welcome you all and thank you all for joining us. We'll start with a few announcements and then I'll give you an introduction to our guest speaker tonight. And inshallah, we'll get into the discussion about cultural creation in the light of the Seerah. So firstly, we'd like to remind you all that the summer program registration is still open. You can go to alimprogram.org/summer-program to register for our 3-week summer program. It'll be held from July 8th through 30th at Benedictine University. We have flexible payment plans available for the summer program, and we also have scholarships and tuition reduction available for those who qualify. So please go to the alimprogram.org/summer-program and register for the program. It's truly a faith-affirming intensive. We discuss topics with renowned scholars from across the country, including Ustadh Ubaydullah, Dr. Sherman Jackson, and many others. And it really is a program, after having done it in the summer of 2019, that I really recommend for American Muslims across the country of all ages and backgrounds. It really roots you in our tradition while dealing with our contemporary issues in this country. I'd also like to announce that the book club will be taking place next Wednesday. And this month, as a reading that will, inshallah, really benefit us during the month of Ramadan, we'll be reading Easy Good Deeds by Mufti Muhammad. Look out, inshallah, for a time change. We'll want to definitely make it before iftar time. But you can go to alimprogram.org/book-club to register for the book club, where you'll be joined by Ustadh Ubaydullah and many other of our ALIM community to discuss the book Easy Good Deeds for this month. And alhamdulillah, Ramadan is right around the corner. May Allah allow all of us to reach it and truly benefit from it. We just want to remind you all to continue to support ALIM during the month of Ramadan. Include us among your list of organizations that you support with your sadaqah during the month of Ramadan. With your donation and support, we continue to host monthly programs like Frames and Book Club, and we could support students to join our summer program and really benefit from our scholars across the country. So I'd like to encourage you all to continue to support ALIM during the month of Ramadan. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, Shaykh Abdullah Misra. Shaykh Abdullah Misra hails from an Indian background and was raised in the Hindu tradition, embracing Islam in 2001. He holds a bachelor's degree in business administration and Islamic studies. He spent 12 years in Amman, Jordan, where he focused on Islamic law, theology, hadith sciences, prophetic biography, and Islamic spirituality, while also working at the Qasid Arabic Institute as director of programs. As a counselor, he works with new Muslims and those struggling with religious obsessive compulsive disorder. Inshallah, tonight he'll be joining Ustadh Ubaydullah to discuss creating culture as Muslims in the West in light of the Seerah. And he also authored the Seerah song that was sung by Zain Bikha. I think that's in relation to that topic. So inshallah, it'll be a really fruitful discussion tonight. Bismillah.
السلام عليكم.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
ما شاء الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا فمن يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله ثم أما بعد. I would like to welcome all of you all to what I hope will end up being a very enlightening and inspiring conversation about the creation of culture in the West in the light of the Seerah. Tonight, my partner in conversation, once upon a time we used to call friends partners in crime, but I have a partner in khayr, a partner in conversation, Shaykh Abdullah Misra, who I only learned just moments ago in the introduction is also a convert to Islam. I would have never guessed.
I'm Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah. I'm Muslim passing, as they say.
the Muslim passing and I must add, very dashing Shaykh Abdullah Misra. How are you? How are you, Shaykh Abdullah?
Bismillah, alhamdulillah. It's so nice to be here with you, alhamdulillah. As I told you, as we just touched base briefly before, I had seen you 18 years ago, very briefly in Yemen, and we never met after that. And I saw you now, mashallah, and I was like, wait a second. I remember that laugh and that smile. So it's a pleasure to see you again after literally 18 years, I think.
Subhanallah. No, it's amazing. At that time, I was still struggling with Arabic, if I remember correctly, and
we all were.
Yeah, and it was I always tell people learning Arabic is it's like scaling a mountain, and at some point you begin you never really reach the top, but you begin to get some good panoramic views, right? But you never quite reach the top. What is your sphere of activity now within the Muslim community, within the Islamic space?
I teach different various locations here in Toronto, Canada. I moved back about a year and a half ago. So alhamdulillah, been back in the West for a year and a half, trying to navigate, looking at things, mashallah. I'm a parent as well. I do counseling as well, especially religious OCD. I'm a part-time imam and just doing dawah work and teaching, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Allah yubarik feek. May Allah elevate you and keep you. So I don't want to keep the audience in anxious anticipation for any longer. The creation of culture, just that expression. Sometimes I think that Muslims talk about culture in such a contrived way. Like the creation, like we talk about it like it's something that requires this very intentional kind of announcement that we are creating culture, when one anthropologist told me that people create culture like spiders spin webs. It's the culture they create is really just a byproduct of their engagement with life. But when we're talking about the creation of culture, there are a number of ways to approach the topic. I mean, I think it's necessarily broad. Why don't you help narrow that down for some of our listeners? What do you mean by the creation of culture?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Bismillah. Often we think it's trying to act in a certain way that's fake and trying to program Muslims to do something. In reality, as you said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually told us in the Quran that mankind or humankind is programmed to live in a certain way, and those ways are diverse, right? And every single person has their own way of doing things. In sa'yakum lashatta, all of your activities are so diverse. For every single group, we've made a certain way that you go and a methodology that you do it. So cultures by themselves express out of nowhere just by humans living. And we cannot be in a vacuum of culture. You can't live without culture. So when I say culture creation, what we really mean, you're gonna create a culture no matter what. Like we're creating one right now as we speak. We are creating culture, right?
Absolutely.
Right. But what it is are you going to have the foresight to ride that wave in a way that is beneficial for you? Or are you only going to react to things that are creating a culture? Like that, they say a culture of fear, a culture of despondency, a culture of lack of confidence. Or are we going to say, no, we're going to ride this wave because it's going to go forward no matter what, right? So either we're going to take the bull by the horns and confidently develop our culture in a way that we empower the community around us, and we send a message that we're proud of what we have and we have a lot to give, or do we do it in an insular fashion in a way that's resisting cultural development? And you can see what happens when that happens.
I think that whenever I attempt to engage Muslim thinkers, intelligentsia, scholars around this issue, the one thing that almost consistently comes up is, how can we develop culture that is authentic to our tradition when surrounded by an alien culture that is, dominant, an alien culture that is, almost unlimited in its influence? Are our attempts to create culture necessarily circumscribed by that dominant alien culture?
No, that's a very good question, because at the end of the day, we just have to be ourselves. There's nothing that we don't have to sit in a boardroom and plan our culture. We literally have to have our values and be ourselves. And our cultures will really be the sum total of how we see our experience, how we express our faith, how we are with our families and our communities. That's the culture that you're going to produce. And so if you import the beautiful things that we have to learn from Islam and from Islamic cultures into our own hearts, it will naturally, diffuse into what we call our, Western Muslim culture. We don't even have to do anything. So in reality, you could be surrounded by, a sea of people who are different than you. But the Seerah tells us that if you're confident with your principles, you keep your community close to you, and you express the beauty of what you know in the language of people and in the way that people understand you, you will be creating culture in a way that is beautiful and attractive. I'm confident of that.
I think for me, the way that I usually try to address that issue is also through the light of the Seerah, but it's to have to take an approach that is like singularly adversarial. Like, the only thing that we are to do is to oppose the dominant culture. And I mean, when I say oppose, I mean uncritically oppose, meaning just because they do it, we must be against it. Just because they promote it, we must discourage it. I think this is misguided. And I think that, when we see the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he has the dual task of being a cultural iconoclast on the one hand. I mean, I was talking to a class earlier today that even the greeting Assalamu alaikum was new to the Arabian Peninsula. That wasn't the way that they were accustomed to greeting each other. The Prophet ﷺ, if he learned that the people of disbelief comb their hair to the back, kind of hard for me to make an analogy about hair, but we do our best with the resources that we've been given. But if he learned that they comb their hair to the back, he would part his hair to the side. If he learned that they wore trousers, he would wear the waist wrapper. He would wear the izar. So there was a deliberate attempt to be different. But this should not be conflated with an uncritical rejection of everything. Right? There were many virtues that the pagan Arabs had. Honoring their covenants, their emphasizing fasaha, or the purity of language, their love for their tribes, their esteeming valor and bravery in battle, their willingness to help travelers and widows and orphans. These were tribal ethics that the Prophet ﷺ, far from discouraging them or trivializing them, he represented the completion of those values. وَمَا بُعِثْتُ إِلَّا أَنْ أُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. I was sent to complete noble traits of character, correct? So
definitely,
how do we, what are some practical steps to having a similar disposition vis-a-vis American or Canadian culture?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because, as you said, the Prophet said, I was sent to complete noble character traits. He didn't say I was sent to introduce them or I was sent to invent them. And the reason they say that Utammima is because it was there before. He was taking it from it was there in the culture. And that's the only reason why people recognized when they saw a paragon of virtue. There were generous people among the Arabs, and they saw someone so generous that they had never seen that before. There were people who were truthful, but he was the most truthful, right? So therefore, we have to remember that if we want to be at the forefront of any sort of influence or cultural development, we have to outdo. We have to take that inspiration and outdo. The Prophet ﷺ, he did not aim to be completely different in the culture. He was a man of his culture. He was very much the Arab prophet. And what we don't realize is, yes, distinct, but not completely against in every single cultural detail, right? And there's a difference. And that level of distinction, so he doesn't start off in the Prophet ﷺ in the Meccan period. You don't hear about mukhalafa. You don't hear about being different culturally. He's just calling you to a truth. Everyone dresses the same. They eat the same. They speak the same language. They have culturally, they are the same, And as one scholar pointed out, if you had, I think it was Dr. Yasser Qadi, who says, if you had looked at the Battle of Badr from an aerial point of view, you would not be able to tell who are the good guys and the bad guys. Because we imagine the Muslims were always the ones in turbans and like white thobes, in how they have the message. And then you have the other side, they just look wicked, or, it's there's nothing like that. There's no cultural distinction. They could not tell. That's why Assalamu alaikum. I have to know, are you Muslim? Because I cannot tell just by looking at you when you're coming out of the desert, right? So there's distinct. And then as time goes by, the Prophet ﷺ starts to create and craft the Muslim identity as distinct from those people who are now differing on a very large scale and not agreeing with the values and practices. And slowly people are taking this up. So it could be in something as subtle as how you part your hair, but your clothes are all the same. It could be just as simple as the same clothes that we wear. I'm going to wear mine a little higher to not drag them on the ground. So it's just distinct enough to say there's a value difference here. What's going on? Oh, it's extravagance. Okay, fine. It's not pride. But you're still one of me and I'm still one of you. And this is why they say as well that the Prophet ﷺ, subhanAllah, essentially he chose Medina as his place to migrate to, because they say that he never migrated to Abyssinia, even though he could have. And he sent, obviously, the companions there.
I was thinking to say that.
Right? And so he recognized, and they returned. Some of the companions who went returned and brought elements of the Abyssinian culture back with them that we have recorded, right? But the Prophet ﷺ himself did not leave his cultural sphere or call for any help from outside of his culture. So some of the scholars say so that there is this complete, there's no opposition on the basis of petty things, on the basis of you guys look different, sound different, eat different food. No, we're the same. I'm the same as you. I just believe in one God and I have a message. And I think that's what we have to kind of convince people that, on a human level, people only, and when you really look at it, Islam is the ultimate cultural, you could say, affirmer. It's culture affirming. I mean, the fact that you mentioned the fasaha, the eloquence of the Arabs, then Allah sends his last book in to master the culture, to override the culture, basically, that it comes into. It comes into a place where eloquence is at the peak, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't say, okay, now change everything. So even a lot of their pagan rituals are actually, they're returned back to Abrahamic roots. But for those Arabs at that time, they're just seeing cognates. Okay, dua, salah. Oh, it's a little different. Okay, ruku, sujud. Okay, it's a little different. Safa, marwa. Things they used to, hey, we used to do this stuff before. And then the Prophet is going to say, yeah, it's pretty similar, but it's taking it back to the origin. But it's not going to be radically different from. And the dialects of the Quran, all this.
No, I mean, when you think about like boiling this down to a single expression, I would think distinct but not alien. You see, to resist attempts to, like the Prophet ﷺ never allowed himself to be alienated. One of my favorite vignettes of the Seerah is when they are marching to Badr. The Prophet ﷺ said, not in poetry but metered speech, أنا رسول الله بلا كذب وأنا ابن عبد المطلب. Right? I am
That's
the
right.
messenger of God. This is no lie. And I am the son of Abdul Muttalib. He was saying that. Many people say he was saying that so as to say, don't try to culturally alienate me. I am from the purest of the lineages of the Arab. It would be like, a Black American Muslim saying, no, and we are the children of Malcolm, right? Just because we have embraced the Sunnah, don't think that in
Yeah.
any way we can be alienated. We are the children of Marcus Garvey. We are the children of W.E.B. Du Bois. We are the children of Sojourner Truth. Meaning, don't try to marginalize me on account of my tawheed and my risala, my divine unity and my message. I am not only one of you, but I'm the best of you. I think that's a very important
Allahu
aspect
Akbar.
of the Prophet Seerah.
That's very important. In fact, even the Quran itself, Allah says it's we brought this down as an Arabic Quran so that the people who hear it cannot say, like, where'd you get this from? Now, it's our job as Muslims to translate that message into the cultures that we live in so people don't find that foreign, because it's the nature of people to reject something that is foreign or that is different, something that seems out of whack. It's just, or out of the norm. It's just human defense mechanisms that you're always suspicious of it. But when something becomes familiar to you, then you start to open up to the idea a little bit more. And the Prophet ﷺ would often try to emphasize the common nature of their backgrounds. When a man was brought to him and this man was trembling because he thought he was in front of a king, the Prophet ﷺ said, relax, I'm just the son of a woman who used to eat dried meat. Meaning, like, the same thing that you guys all eat, the same background that you guys have, that's where I'm from too. Don't worry about it. He would appeal to people on the basis of their lineages. He could try. In fact, he said, learn your lineage so you can, like, connect to people. And he would be able to connect and put a finger to every single tribe in Quraysh. He said, I'm not asking you for anything except the love that you give to someone who is a distant relative of yours.
Allahu Akbar.
In the same way, now we don't have that idea of tribal relations. We have the idea of citizenry. We have that idea of cultural affinity. So,
Allahu Akbar. No, I think the larger question here that I know everyone is contemplating is, okay, that much is clear. I think Shaykh Abdullah, Brother Ubaydullah, they've made clear that there's an imperative to be comfortable. Even Dr. Rushain Abbasi, he talked about the term ista'marakum fil ard, that God established you. He was the first person I heard mention, like, ista'marakum fil ard, that we've established you in the land, that we should never be, Muslims shouldn't be adrift and wrestling with questions of cultural inauthenticity.
Right.
Okay, how do we manage our own diversity? That's a separate. When you talk about the creation of culture, one is like vis-a-vis Canadian or American culture, but then you have Black American Muslim culture, Indian American Muslim culture, or Canadian. Or when I say, every time I say America, I mean North America.
I take it as a granted.
Right. I don't mean, I know Americans can be so culturally self-centered, but
no.
So we have Arab Canadian culture, Indian Canadian culture. You have folks from the Caribbean, that have embraced Islam. They have a distinct culture. How are we supposed to manage all of that diversity? And should our aim be the creation of kind of a single culture, or must we accept this diversity of cultures that will probably characterize our cultural expression?
Yeah, I think that we have, basically, because of a lot of post-colonial trauma and a lot of different things that Muslims have come through, right? Whether they're, from here, for example, the Black American community has their own experience. People who have converted, who are immigrants or converted, or come over from Muslim countries, we're all kind of dealing with this kind of baggage. And I think that there were two different approaches to dealing with being in a land where you're the minority. One is to become insular and resist, right? Which is that we're not going to let this culture come into us. We're going to try to resist as much as possible. And then there's the idea of adapting, taking control, and culture creation in that sense is just confidence. The Prophet ﷺ, he said something very interesting when he came to Medina and he saw the Ansar cross-pollinating their date palm trees. And the Prophet ﷺ, they were traders from Mecca, and he was in a new culture, and they were with the Ansar, and he told them, hey, if you don't do that cross-pollination, maybe it'll be fine. It'll just be okay, And then they said, oh, okay, we won't do it. So they didn't do it. And then that year, their crop didn't yield as much. So they came back to the Prophet and said, like, you told us not to do it. And he said, Antum a'lamu bi umuri dunyakum. He says, you people know your world better. In fact, what it really translates to, you know your world best. And what that means is, it doesn't mean that you don't listen to the Prophet, not at all, But what he says is, he's telling you to learn to trust yourself. And in the other narrations of the hadith, he's saying, I just said from what I was thinking. If I speak to you from Allah, that's no lie, right? When I speak to you from myself, that's something. So he was trying to tell them that I wasn't giving you a command at that point. I was telling you something. So just to guide you along that thinking. But that empowerment by saying you people know better the affairs of your world. In other words, the world that you live in, you know your world best. So you don't ask someone else from somewhere else to tell you how to be in your community or your world. And when knowledge was something that was considered foreign, and it doesn't mean that there's any fadl of the Prophet was better than everybody else, yet he's empowering them. And he's teaching them. You guys know yourself. Don't worry. Be confident about what you learn from me and apply it in the way that you know is best. So we used to rely on, foreign fatwas. We used to rely on these things. And that was okay because we didn't have knowledge here. Now, many of us, subhanAllah, you and I first met in like Yemen, and we spent time over there. We came back. Now knowledge is now become part of this. It's in the soil here now. There are people thinking from these cultures about Islam. So we have to, first of all, be confident that the Prophet told us we know our world better. And once you have that confidence, you see, it's that confidence itself translates into being able to make the decisions sometimes where you need to say, okay, we used to do it like this, but now looking at the youth, now looking at situations, we're going to have to do it like this, keeping in mind the principles of Islam, but keeping in mind the world as well. So like there were times where the Prophet ﷺ would even say a ruling and the Ansar would push back a little bit. And this is a strange thing, right? So the Prophet ﷺ said, "Iyakum wal julus fi turuqat." He said, do not hang out on the streets. Don't hang out on the street. And they said, "Oh Rasulullah, we don't have any other choice but to hang out on the street. Like this is where we sit. This is where we hang out." So the Prophet said, so if you absolutely refuse, then just mind the right of the street.
Allah Akbar.
And so what you see here is that the Prophet was telling them, don't hang out here. And they're saying, it's our culture. This is where we congregate. This is how we mix.
This is what we do.
This is what we do. This is what we do, right? So he didn't say at that point, you didn't hear what I said. Like I'm the messenger of Allah. They pushed back, but in a very polite, loving way. But they were confident enough to say, this is our culture, Ya Rasulullah. What do we do about that? And then he said, if you don't accept that, so we know that there's a higher level. If you don't accept that, at least mind these principles. So now we have working principles. There were other times when they pushed back and he said, no. He said, stop, do not drink alcohol. Do not drink after the forbidding of alcohol. There were containers that they used to make wine in. And he said, don't use those containers anymore to store water. And they said, Ya Rasulullah, these are our jars. But because they were so close to that jahiliyyah, he said, don't use them. He said, we have nothing else to use. He says, then don't use it. So there were times when he said, a firm no. When it came to jumping into something that would take you back to something clearly haram. And there are other times where it's like, okay, that's a cultural thing. And he would respect when people would come from away, bring something that was different, and okay, there's a little adjustment here. We know that Jafar, radiallahu anhu, his cousin, his most beloved cousin, who he said, you resemble me most in looks and character. When he came back after maybe 8-10 years in Abyssinia, and he came back, Jafar had imbibed some of the Abyssinian culture. So when the Prophet was so happy, he told him that, he started to do like hajjal, which is like a type of a step dance around. And he said, what is this? He said, this is what we used to see that the people in Abyssinia used to do around their kings when they were made very happy, So he didn't say like, why'd you do that? Don't do that, according to different narrations. And you have this situation where it's like Omar radiallahu anhu, and I'll just finish after this. He actually, when the people after the Prophet, when they took over Persia, when they liberated Persia, and they had started, the companions who went there started to wear pants, silwar, like pajamas. And he saw them coming back, and he said, whoa, when you come here, you wear the izar. Like, we're Arabs, you wear the izar. Like, when you're over there, you dress like that, fine. When you come here, you dress like this. So there's this idea that where you are, it's fine to be of where you are. And when you're somewhere else, be in that way, but your principles and be confident about them.
Yeah, and I think the reason that becomes difficult for certain communities is that even though we like to deny it, right? It's difficult for us to acknowledge there is something of a hegemony of, authenticity that certain people, I would say Arabs maybe at the top, then maybe some Desis, and then maybe some, continental Africans, and then maybe some Southeast Asians, and then, right, in terms of being confident in your, Shaykh Abdullah, did I lose you? No, but okay, there you go, you're back. Being confident in your, vernacular culture, right? And knowing that, and I think that this is not simply something that has taken place inadvertently. No, I don't think this is taking place inadvertently. I do think there has been some intentional disempowerment that has occurred within some segments of our community. And we have unintentionally cultivated this, you need to ask permission about everything because you don't know anything, to the point that some people are calling their sheikh like, sheikh, somebody just told a joke. Can I laugh? And I think that this is something that has ultimately been very destructive to the potential of Islam in America, and especially Black American communities. And I can only speak about that because I've experienced it firsthand.
Right. No, I definitely agree. Look, there is gatekeeping that has occurred. Human beings, it's the nafs that likes to hold on to power, and the ability to interpret is a type of power. The ability to gatekeep and decide who does what is power. But the amazing thing is this, that as time goes on, and we are simply, we study for ourselves now, we're confident, alhamdulillah, in this. We're not going back to, we go back to our teachers for the blessings, for some nitty gritty issues. But other than that, we make our decisions about what's best. And this is what our teachers empowered us to do. That's what knowledge is supposed to do, of course, in consultation and consensus with all the other people. But the point is that we're moving forward. Like, look at this podcast. You're a convert, I'm a convert, right? There's no one had to rubber stamp this. The people who are joining and listening, so we move ahead. And this is the whole point, that, without any sense of, I think you just have to keep your head up and show people that you're not going to despair of it. You're not going to be, it's not a cultural pecking order. And that's for back home. Remember, they're dealing with their own ideas of caste in its own weird ways that came into the Muslim world, let's say in the subcontinent, from, you're dealing with all kinds of power structure. You're dealing with dictatorships and how things run in places where everyone has to tell the other person by force what to do. So that naturally, even if you don't intend it, that naturally filters into where you've come to make a home. But the next generation now, we have a choice. Do we want to continue with that? We can take the positive things from the cultures that were brought over, and we have the job now of making that synthesis. And I think it's happening whether people like it or not. Alhamdulillah.
Yeah, no, and I think, you know, I think about it almost like a kind of you know, planting. You know, if you take, you know, a plant that grows abundantly in the subcontinent, you might not be able to grow that same plant in Canada. You know, the atmospheric conditions are not feasible for the
Right.
growth and cultivation of this plant. But you can learn techniques, strategies. You know,
Right.
the methods of those farmers can become a part of your frame of reference. But seeing
Right.
as though you're growing something a little bit different, maybe some of what
Right.
you do has to look different. I think the issue that I've
Yeah.
seen in you know, the U.S. and in Canada less so, because usually when I'm in Canada, it's for events. I haven't really
Right.
spent a lot of time with community in Canada, but
Right.
I look forward to that in
Inshallah.
the near future, inshallah. But
Um,
I think that I find no one is willing to defer to local communities that have intimate knowledge of their circumstance. So when I go to,
yes.
you know, Egypt, for instance, and I see something concerning to me, right? I see something that, you know, for me, I'm like, I need to do a nahyu an al-munkar. I need to say something about this. And I have,
Mm.
an Egyptian, scholar tell me, no, just leave that alone, because if you, proscribe that, it will probably lead to an even bigger issue. So
Yes.
we've just learned
Yes.
to kind of accept that as kind of an an umum al balwa, like
Yes.
a widespread evil, but we don't really address it in our speeches or lectures or classes. We just kind of leave that where it is. Naturally, I
Mm.
would defer to them. Okay, you must know best. But when we say something like
Right.
that, Sheikh, don't talk about that, right? Don't,
Right.
I understand the cultural context inside of which this would appear a huge issue, but given everything we're dealing with, yeah, you probably don't want to make an issue out of that, right? These are young people in the
Yeah.
masjid. Some of them have holes in their jeans. You probably don't want to talk about that. The sheikh will
Yeah.
still
Yeah.
go up and talk about it.
Right. Right. What he's supposed to do. I mean, this is where that's slowly fading away. That's slowly fading away. So I did a masjid program recently, and I said, they completely had the youth, boys and girls, in a completely separate room. So I'm in front of the youth, the males, and giving my talk, and we're doing Q&A, and the women, I can't even see them at all. And so I said to the organizers afterwards, I didn't know this when I went there. I said afterwards, I said, you might want to next time just have them come in the room. You just sit separately. It's fine. So they said something. You tell us what to do. He said, you have to tell us what to do. And I appreciated that, because it was a more conservative environment. It was a conservative environment. But what happens is, anyone who's a parent, anyone who's looking around at society, when you're looking at the kind of questions that the youth are asking, you realize, wait a second. I think people who with a sense, they realize this is not your grandfather's, masjid. This is not the one back home. So they are differing in a big way. There are some of the politics that are still there, but again, then we have to create our own spaces. And if you have those voices that are speaking out of sync, it's not surprising no one's listening to them, right? Our biggest challenge is not the voices of the pioneers that we respect from yesterday, but sometimes they sound out of tune with in some modern issues. Our question is our brothers and sisters who are kind of rebounding to that. Sometimes I think, as a result of the confusion of trying to navigate and negotiate, that's the bigger one. When I see someone who's like born, raised here, I know they were hanging out on the block, like just, a little while ago, or we,
Sure.
and all of a sudden there's that down. That's my greater concern when it comes to this
I
topic.
think that grows out of a legitimate frustration. I think that
Yeah.
if you are going to live spontaneously as a Muslim in the West, you must get accustomed to making salat al-istikhara. Right?
Subhanallah.
One of my teachers, he told me, we are living in a time that perplexes even, it's like يَضْطَرِبُ فِيهِ الْحَلِيمُ, right? There's
No.
ittirab for even someone who's halim, even someone who is
No.
very composed and has equanimity, is perturbed in our time. And he said that if you're looking for something in the Torah, something in the tradition that will obviate the need for asking God directly to guide you, it's not there. That even the Prophet ﷺ, who had as pure a connection to the divine as has ever existed, still had to ask God directly, guide my decisions, guide my choices. I don't know, right? I don't know exactly what I'm doing. Even when the Prophet ﷺ, and I love this, when he dispatches Mu'adh ibn Jabal radiallahu anhu to Yemen, right? Essentially as a mu'allim and a mufti. And he asked him, what is your minhaj, right? How will you, كيف تحكم على الناس? And he says, I'll look for, something in the book of Allah. And he says, what if you don't find what is suitable in the book of Allah? What? Like, the thing that blows me away about this is the humility and the admission that even though this is revelation directly from God, maybe it won't contain everything.
Yes.
And we're talking in Yemen, in the time of the Prophet. And Mu'adh says, he says, then I will reference your sunnah. I will reference what I know of your personal lived example. What if you don't find what you're looking for in my personal lived example? Like this is amazing self-realization from the Prophet ﷺ, that maybe not everything is there. Then Mu'adh says, what? I will use my intellect. I will weigh the situation, right? Kind of giving license for istinbat. I will do my best. Burika feek ya Mu'adh. Allah, the Prophet ﷺ, announces a benediction. He, invokes a blessing for Mu'adh, right? But the admission that not everything we're looking for is in the tradition. Some of this will require ingenuity, creativity. I don't. Can Muslims say the word creativity?
But it's interesting because the Prophet ﷺ also said in the same dialogue when he's sending off Mu'adh radiallahu anhu, he said, first call the people. You're going to Yemen. First call the people to La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, to bear witness. If they accept that, then call them towards prayer. If they accept that, then call them towards zakat, and they pay it among their own people. So there's this idea of like tadrij, of kind of gradualism, that you only put on people what they can handle at any given time, knowing that there will come a time as their culture develops and as they become fully Muslim and they grow into their deen, then you put something more, but not before the foundational thing is there. And as you said, even though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, subhanAllah, he says, to use the Prophet says to use your judgment. Allah tells the Prophet وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ, make consultation. So ask people around you. Now, the Prophet could have just himself made every decision and it would have been fine. So why is he told to ask people who don't know as much as him, who are not as pious as him, who don't have the long view? Because they understand the ground of, and it's just to teach us to always be in, consultation with the people around you. So I think that's a big part of adjustment, is just saying, look around you and see what people have to say. And that's your culture. That is your people. If you're on one level and everyone else is saying something else, that's a problem.
They say that, if somebody is supposed to be leading and he looks behind him or she looks behind her and she doesn't see anybody following, he's no longer a leader. He's just a guy out taking a walk. You see, so you have to make sure that people are with you. And I think all in that وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ, it empowers people. People don't gravitate. I remember a good friend of mine, really into Arabic. He was talking about the word temkeen. And he was saying how this word is so alien. Of course, temkeen is kind of a modern Arabic rendering of empowerment. Temkeen al-mar'a. You'll see this in a lot of political documents. Like, one of the aims of this initiative is temkeen al-mar'a. And he was saying that there is no classic Islamic notion of temkeen. And I was like, well, maybe not the term temkeen. But the term temkeen certainly does appear to be a neologism. It's something new. But the idea of وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ, this is clearly a command to empower people. They don't know as much as the Prophet ﷺ, but get their opinion. Now, if you think about a messenger of God who is omnipotent and omniscient, right? Being told, make sure you ask the opinion of people. To me, the real purpose of that is so that they feel that their judgment, their ideas, their perspectives were taken into consideration before you arrive at a conclusion. After you arrive at a conclusion, فَإِذَا عَزَمْتَ فَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ. Right?
That's right.
Right? After you've arrived at a conclusion, then rely on God. But I think the mawdi' shahid there is, how can people really lock in if they feel that their opinions, maybe their genius, their background, hasn't really been considered?
And this is the disempowerment in the attitude that Muslims may inherit in their religious community, that you don't know enough, you don't speak the right language, you don't look this way, or a sister, this is your place, this is your position, or you haven't studied long enough. And so basically what ends up happening is people withdraw into the back. Now, the thing about the precarious situation we're in is that people won't go to the back, they'll go out of the building. That's the problem. You see, when you don't empower people, because people need to feel like empowered, they need to feel like they belong, right? And if you're in a wider culture that's saying, come, you belong to us, and you're not empowering people in your own house, someone will say, well, why don't I just go outside? And when they leave the building, there's no guarantee they're coming back. And so this is really the difference in between when you are a powerful force, because the Muslims have been dealing with change right since the beginning. It's not just us who've had to deal with new cultural things. Right from the beginning, the Sahaba entered a new land and they met different people, and they said, well, it's not written what we're supposed to do in this situation. So they had to make ijtihad, they had to do things. And as Islam spread everywhere, the unique thing is now we're a minority and we don't have control of the situation. So even the Indo-Pak subcontinent, they were a minority, but they had power and control. We don't have that. So what do you do if you want to survive and you don't have power and control? There's two things. Either you grovel, right, and you lose everything. You lose who you are. Or you just behave overconfident. In other words, we need to become very confident about who we are and start showing it to other people, start believing it in ourselves. When we believe in ourselves, I think that's where you create a feeling of strength. That's from Allah, even when it might not actually be there. But you have to make people feel like there's something going on here that's very special. We want you to be a part of it. And we're going to listen to you as well. I think that's how we have to move forward.
MashaAllah. We had a question. Aisha, can you please put that question back? Can you see the question as well, Shaykh Abdullah?
I can, yes.
But it's asking about America specifically, but I still want you to address it. What do you believe the vision of Islam in America / Canada should be so that it's relevant to this and that community, and move away from the ideas that diaspora communities bring from back home?
Bismillah. I think that the vision of Islam, first of all, we have to dig a little deeper into what our values are, our core values, and look at what the Prophet ﷺ first brought to people before he even gave them the details of law, or before he even taught them about things. It was the way that he was that really took people, and then he could teach them anything he wanted. And what we have to realize, first of all, is realize we have a sacred purpose here. Like there's a real big reason for why millions of us have been brought over or become Muslim here. Like why did Islam come to me when I had nothing to do with it and born in this country?
I think this is huge, man. I think this is huge.
Yeah.
Continue.
So the divine destiny is something number one, we have to not only realize it, we have to start owning it and act like we have a beautiful mandate and a mission from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that if you take it upon ourselves. And that's one thing. The second thing is to see, well, wait, if core values of generosity, of mercy, of having guidance, of family values, of many things, they appeal universally to people, right? Charity. But do we are we fully realized in those values, and can we increase in those values among ourselves in order to bring that out to other people? Like the vision of Islam has to be, our community has to work really, really well before there can be a vision for a broader society. We can't say that we're going to take it everywhere else, but our little island of Islam here in the West is not functioning in a very happy way, because people always look at one thing. Is it working or is it not working? I don't want to hear what you're saying. Are you happy? Are you
Absolutely.
You know, if we're happy, we're thriving, you know, then it'll make a positive impact. And that's what I think the vision of Islam is in these countries.
And I always tell people that the ideal of our community functioning well does not mean that we're a utopian community without problems. That is probably never going to happen, right? It means that we have developed mechanisms. We have developed means of dealing with our issues. We are a community of incredible diversity, linguistic diversity, socioeconomic diversity, historical diversity. We have different fears. We have different obsessions. We have different priorities. For us to be able to create a Muslim civil society that all of these perspectives can receive their hearing, right? And we're finding some functional way to bring all of this chaos under one roof and live together. That, to me, is what success looks like in our communal endeavor. Doesn't mean that, you know, we all vote the same way, or we all look the same way, or in fact, I think that kind of uniformity would be off-putting to a lot of our colleagues, compatriots, neighbors, rather because we would appear almost cultish. You know, one of the things that one of the hardest eras of Islamic study, Islamic historical research, is the immediate post-prophetic period. All of this fighting.
Yeah. Oh,
I'm back. You know, the immediate, post-prophetic period. You know, in the aftermath of the passing of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there's all of this intramural fighting, and it's just, you know, Imam Zayd Shakir, hafidhahullah, he said, if you're going to study that history, take your Iman vitamins before you study it. I was reviewing some of that history with Dr. Sherman Jackson, and he said, he offered a perspective that I never considered before he said it. He said all of the fighting among the Sahaba actually indicates that the Prophet ﷺ was laying the foundation of a world civilization and not a cult. You see, all of them felt empowered to differ with each other. This was not a cult of absolute uniformity and we all look the same, we all think the same, we all do the same thing. No, he was laying the foundation of a world civilization that has in it the seeds of diversity, the seeds of differing opinion. And we saw that play out in a very violent way, unfortunately, in the early post-prophetic period. But it's because they were empowered. This wasn't a top-down cult. No. And, you know, sometimes that kind of that spirit of empowerment can be expressed in a very explosive, shall we say, a very violent way even. But that's who we are as a people.
Yeah, no, definitely this is who we are, because the beauty of the diversity, it's people think that it's differences, it's like a problem to have different opinions, to have different kind of wavelengths, ways of thinking. The thing is, the Prophet, even in his own lifetime, companions differed, and he actually endorsed two people, making two groups of people, making different ijtihad, and he said, you're right and you're right, it's fine, you know. And so you actually had examples of where companions would try their best and still be endorsed, because they were both following the principles that they were taught, but they came to different conclusions. As you know, praying Asr at Khaybar. Should you pray Asr when you get to Khaybar, or should you, if you're going to miss it, should you pray first and then, you know? So there's all these there were different opinions in that hadith. And in the same way, one of the beauties of even the differences of opinion is that everyone can find a place, and especially when you are a minority or you're not in power, right? The top-down approach creates, as you said, like a cult. You're in or you're out. Now what we have is anybody from any culture, if I like one culture or another, I can just fall into that group here, and we're still part of the bigger family. And that is actually the beauty of Islam. It is the most accommodating and the most universal community or way of life there is. And it's really in competition right now with monoculture. They think that they're the most, but they're not accommodating. They take over, right? It's like, you got to wear jeans and eat McDonald's, right? But at the same time, it's imposing. At the same time, the masjid, subhanAllah, is a place where you see all kinds of different people. You and I are from completely different walks of life. And if it was not for Islam, honestly, we would never have seen each other ever, But alhamdulillah, look, we're here, we're talking about one thing. So everyone can find their space and even level of practice. And that's very, very important. So you need your movements, your pietistic movements, and your masjids that are very, very orthodox, very, very strict. You need your kind of places where youth can just be, and you need, the funny thing is, even though, in a scholarly sense, we don't rubber stamp it, but the fringes, right, of where practice is just a little, but identity is there. Even that is something that has a use in the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the whole point
brilliant. No, bismillah.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I was just saying we want to keep everybody, you can pick your room, you can pick your floor, but stay in the house. Like, you want to keep everybody in the ring so that eventually you come back. Even like Muslim cultures, the strange thing is, if you look at Indo-Pak culture and other places, they had atheist Muslims, and they would still consider them Muslim. Isn't that strange? I mean, again, from the scholarly side, I'm not rubber stamping that. Okay, I'm not saying we should, but I'm saying from a civilizational perspective, there was a type of a wisdom that even I think scholars back then had, to know that, look, keep everybody loosely attached to you, even if it's by a hair or by a thread. Because one day, if not them, then their next generation, you'll pull it back and they'll all come back into that circle. So even the atheist had a janazah because he was Muslim.
No. It's I always say that is a sign of the civilizational strength of Islam. Meaning, even if I don't have a religion of personal conviction, I have a cultural attachment to this way of seeing the world and being in the world. Meaning, I am
Right.
attached to the
Yes.
larger civilizational narrative that is Islam. Now, inside of that, my personal faith can go up, it can go down, I can lose it, I can be revived, all of that is happening in the servant's relationship with her Lord, right? But in
Definitely.
terms of my sense of normativity is defined by Islam. When I was in Egypt, the thing that I found most inspiring, man, because I really didn't know. I realized that as an American Muslim, most of my engagement with Muslims is in explicitly religious context. I don't, I mean, that's, if a person is
Yeah.
not, extremely religious as a Muslim, or at least, a person that attends conferences, goes to masajid, goes to classes, attends iftars, etc. I'm probably not going to have any engagement with a person outside of that kind of limited sphere of activity. In Egypt, I
Right.
got a chance to just see Muslims at their best, at their
Yeah.
worst,
Yeah.
at their intermediate. You know what I'm saying? And
Mm-hmm.
only then did I understand the immense prophetic wisdom in the statement, المؤمن القوي خير من المؤمن الضعيف وفيهما خير. That the strong believer is better than the weak believer, but in both of them there is good. See, I didn't
Allah.
understand that until I saw.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, I see. This is
Right.
there's a whole range. One day, true story, Shaykh Abdullah, I was on the bus and I was going to my Quran teacher, his house, to read to him, and I was reciting some of the verses that I was preparing for my teacher, and there was a woman sitting across from me on the bus, short sleeve shirt, no head covering, acrylic nails. And she looked over to me and she corrected my tajweed. She said, no. When you make it, when you make idgham, you have to hold your lips together, right? When you make
Allah.
idgham, and I looked at her like, what would you know about that? Because to my mind, you don't look religious. What would you know about tajweed?
Yeah.
And she looked at me and she said,
Yeah.
ده مش أي كلام, ده كلام الله.
Allah.
ده مش أي كلام, ده كلام الله.
Yeah.
لازم أن تظبط حروفها. This
Allah.
is not any speech. This is the speech of God.
Yes.
You must recite it correctly. And I sat there like, what just happened? Like a woman with a short sleeve shirt on, no head covering, acrylic nails, just corrected my tajweed. What's going on here? And that's when I realized, for her, religion is not just, it's not an identity limited to her clothes or her head covering or lack thereof, or her press-on nails or lack thereof. This is a way she exists in the world. Right?
Mm-hmm.
These are axiomatic truths that there's, that there's a God, and that God has revealed to us his speech. And when we recite it, we must recite it correctly.
Right. But
and
that's what she held on to.
That was something to hold on to. Yeah. That was something to hold on to.
Yeah. Subhanallah. I mean, I think this is the whole thing. Everybody can hold on to a different thing, and you don't know what it is that's anchoring a person to their deen. Maybe it might just even be their name, or the fact that they went to Eid, or something like that. Or it could be something as amazing as this, where someone's knowledge comes out and you didn't expect it. This is why I'm saying we need to see Islam as something a lot deeper than just what the students of knowledge, what they expect from other people. Because otherwise, what you're essentially saying is, if you don't fit this mold, you're not really welcome into this space. right? That we call the religious community. And in reality, we have to stop making people think. This is why people turn back to their culture, because Islam has to be your context. It has to be your overarching, it has to be the way that you think in terms of your civilizational attitude, right? But if we start making it that, no, Islam is a very narrow set of rules that we have that I learned, so you must follow. What we end up saying to people is, you're not in this space, so you're going to have to find a seat on some bus because my bus is way too small. We have to say, no, get on the bus. We'll figure out where you sit later.
No, and it's interesting. Dr. Jackson, he said that Muslims in the classical period were able to create a centrifugal force, right?
Yes.
Centrifugal meaning that pulls everything at the margins into the center. Whereas Muslim scholars now, inadvertently, I don't think many of them or us or what have you do it intentionally, but we're creating a centripetal force that drives everything out. Meaning, like,
pushing out.
You are, either you're with this small cadre of people that are, mashallah, impressively committed and devout, or you're nothing, right? You have no value, right? Your talents cannot serve the community at all. And whenever whenever I see that attitude, I'm like, when you read about the great futahat of Muslim armies, who do you think was leading those battles? Imam Shafi'i, right? When you visit these beautiful masajid, right, in the majority Muslim, who do you think designed them? Ghazali? Right? It's like Islam was the site of much cultural genius, not just religious scholars.
Exactly. We are not a theocracy. This is something that we have to, bring across. But because the scholars are the ones now who are holding on to the identity for, they're kind of the anchors of identity. So there's a tendency to say that the scholars are the ones who shape society. And it's not that case. They're the moral anchors of the society. But Salahuddin Ayyubi was not a scholar in that formal sense. All these many other people who are leaders of civilization and culture. But what you do is you refer to those people. Now, if the Muslim community gets only reduced to the imam in the masjid, right, and everything else now becomes separated into your ethnic culture, then that's why there's the imperative of cultural creation, like to kind of come back to what you were saying before, that we cannot just survive alone with Islam is what's in the mosque with the imam. And the rest of the way, the context of where you think and you be has to be ascribed to outside. People will not be able to sustain that. This is why, actually, Dr. Jackson says this as well. That change is not happening from the scholars. You don't want the scholars necessarily to be running the cultural, development, because that's not what they're about. Like, as you said, how often do we sometimes get onto campuses and just go incognito and just see what everyone else is doing? We don't always get the chance to do that. But it's people who can take something that you teach them, become empowered by that, and then be confident to go out and make a difference, whether it's in sport, whether it's in, education, politics, cooking, whatever it is. That's when you have the creation of space in order for religious values to live over there.
Bismillah. I think that this is perhaps an excellent segue into a conversation about art, right? Of course, it's, when you talk about, the creation of culture, I think that we would be remiss if we didn't address, I think, the precarious plight of the Muslim artist. And I mean visual artist, spoken word artist. I really, I had a chance to interview Lena Khan, who's Canadian, I believe.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, mashallah.
No, she's California.
She's not Canadian?
Oh. No, she lives in LA, in Hollywood.
I think she's from Canada, but I could be wrong.
Oh, maybe she's from Canada before. I could be wrong.
Yeah,
I could be wrong.
I could be wrong. But my point
Same
is,
thing.
alhamdulillah, she's an amazingly talented, gifted filmmaker, and we got a chance to talk about how difficult it is to be multi-contextual in that way. I mean, she's dealing with Hollywood and all of its crazy demands. Then you have a religious community that is, I would even say, chomping at the bit to invalidate you. It's what I mean. What if you could address a few words to Muslim creatives, working in all fields and all media. What do you see there?
So the art is something that expresses beauty and meaning, and those two things that humans, after their most basic needs are fulfilled, really long for. And that's what that's where they get their values, and that's where they get a lot of their influence from. So there are many civilizations in which Islam spread through the conveyance of beauty and meaning. And we draw that from divine beauty, right? Allah's beauty, right? Allahul Jameel yuhibbul jamal, right? Allah is beautiful, loves beauty, comes through the Quran, infused in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ in his being, and then it just spreads out into every single art form that you can think of. Okay, which is why I say, like, it's funny because when you look at the subcontinent, the best instrumentalists are Muslims, even though the Muslim scholars say it's haram. The best actors are the Muslims. The best singers are the Muslims. The best composers are the Muslims, even though they're being condemned by another pole of their community. And my suspicion is this, that when beauty comes into a civilization, it has that central role in the role of the saint and the scholar, but then it diffuses out and it touches people in every way and keeps them tied to Islam. And it's a little reflection of that divine, even if it's not being done in a way that is, acceptable or fathomable by more religiously sensible people. And so what happens is you have to make sure that you don't cut that cord. That's very, very important, because if you want to send your way of thinking and normalize your ethos and your values, you have to send it through art, because that actually cuts through all lines and goes straight to a person's psyche, their inner being, and they can and it's very difficult to hate people whose art you like, right? So it's a survival mechanism. It's a survival mechanism. It's an acceptance mechanism. It's a dawah tool. It's a confidence mechanism, which I honestly believe, if it was not for Muslim art, for example, in India, because that's where my parents are from, and I was Hindu before. If it wasn't for art, I think Muslims would have it would have been much, much worse in the Muslim situation in India. But they're still on the top of all of those things, achieving in many ways. And so it attracts people. And how many people came to Islam through hip hop? How many people came to Islam through art over here? So the artists play a very, very particular role. And, before Islam, I was a musician. I was into certain things. I left it for many years. Now, as I came back, I said, listen, we can't have this divide between the scholars and the artists. They have to realize we're all on the same team.
We're all on the same team. See,
you have to. Yeah.
No. You were in a groove, man. I shouldn't have stopped you. Go ahead, Bismillah.
No, we're vibing. Go ahead. No, we're vibing. Go ahead.
No. I think that this is a very important recognition that we're on the same team, and we have to understand that the roles we play on the team are, in fact, diverse. My job is to keep us as a community in conversation with the prophetic ideal as expressed in our turath. That's my job. That's what I'm supposed to do. But your job is to take the ideals and realities of Islam and make them accessible to people through media of art. That's your job. Right. And our relationship is sometimes it's a push and pull. When I sit with Muslim writers, I'm like, did you have to use that profanity? Right? Do you have to do that? And he's like, Ustadh, I want the story to be real. I'm like, well, some of this I think is a little gratuitous, but but the fact that as a Muslim creative, he's open to that conversation and hasn't written me off as just another person with Islamic training that's out of touch. I think just the willingness to have that conversation. I mean, this is what we should be about as a community. This is the kind of culture we should be creating. Also too, I always tell people, look, if you want to impact Muslim creatives, the best way to impact them is actually to support them, right? To actually show that, there are Muslims, when you go up on stage and you perform, there are Muslims listening. This is something I've seen successfully encourage some hayat, some shame, where it's like, maybe you don't know this. And I know that you perform for popular audiences, but you have some young Muslims that actually look up to you. And he's like, oh, no, don't tell me that, because now, I'm going to have reservations about saying some of the things I say.
Yeah, it's true. Or if even if you don't, we lost each other.
No, we did. My son cut the light off.
MashaAllah. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
MashaAllah. No, I think the art, you're right, because you don't drive them away. You see, the thing is this: people will create art whether you like it or not. This is what I realized. That if you say no, and if you say stop it, haram, they're just going to go do what they want anyway. And then they won't be proud to identify as you. So they'll say, yeah, I'm from a Muslim background. My parents were Muslim or are Muslim, but I'm doing my thing. I don't want to be identified that way. But when, and there may be something inside that makes them want to push you away because they're inwardly, they're a little like guilty, or they feel guilty, or they just feel judged. When you embrace somebody and you say, look, I'm not talking about what you're saying, what your jokes are saying. I'm not talking about your music, the content. I mean, you are valuable to me. You
Allahu Akbar
are someone that I have. Then when you say that, how much can you resist? I mean, if you're doing it to, I want to give you dawah, brother, come. Then they know. Then they say, we're going to get away from the guy with the beard who's knocking, and I don't like this. Like, move away. But when you say, no, I don't want anything from you. I think this one line in your song, that was awesome. That was really deep. That was it. That's it. Oh, wow. You appreciated it. You're watching my stuff. Okay. All right. So this guy's not a weirdo. All right. So now the thing is this, they're going to go ahead. They're going to create it whether you like it or not. So I would rather say, just like, and only a parenting mind can probably understand this. I'd rather keep you, within my field of view, and even have a hair between us so I can pull it, rather than, because I studied all these books and I need to impose them on everybody else now. Otherwise, it's not going to make sense for me in the world. I'm going to feel bad for why I'm here. That's just a disaster, right? No, it's not the way that the Prophet said about it.
No, this is, and I always feel like, we should. We had a question a bit ago that I didn't address. I would feel bad taking my sister Esma's question before I took the previous question, but we are winding down to maybe the last 10 minutes here. So Aisha, can I please see the previous question? It was about things being black or white, and okay. It was, but there was
there's one before that.
It was the one before that. Oh, there it is. People have lost a lot of ability in embracing that ambiguity and feel like you're either right or wrong. What do you think about that?
Yes. The black and white mentality comes from a sense of insecurity. If we really looked at a lot of the micro issues that have differences of opinion, we would realize that the only reason why we want to have a hard yes or no is because we find it difficult to live in ambiguity, because we don't feel confident at that point. When we go deeper than the level of differences, right, on the level of the kind of pedantic things, and we go into the seerah. This is why seerah is so important. We go into the spirituality of Islam, the Quranic imperative of Islam, deep into the hadith. You get
keep
values.
going. I have to close my door.
All right, no problem. You get values when you do that allow you to live with a little bit of difference. So we're not fighting about all the little things as a community. You can say, okay, you can do that, and I'll do this within Islam, but we still tolerate each other. So part of the black and white mentality is a sense of insecurity that can only go, that you'll notice that the more a scholar learns, the more broad-minded they get. We need to pick up on that, on those deep teachings, to be able to get that broad-minded attitude. So I can live with a difference of opinion. Now we're not fighting about things. Okay, good. Let's work on a common ground then.
MashaAllah. I couldn't have said it better. They say, "Man qalla ilmuhu, kathura inkaru." The less knowledge a person has, the more censorious they are. They censure everything. Right?
Yeah.
Right? They censure everything. Right? We had another question. We're in the last 10. I want to give our audience an opportunity to converse with Shaykh Abdullah. Well, okay, we said, I'm curious about how to hold space for diverse forms of art and culture without allowing shaitan to excuse things bordering on haram under that umbrella. I've seen this slippery slope before. What do you think then?
It's a slippery slope. There's no doubt. It is a slippery slope. But remember something, that you who has consciousness of this slope can save yourself because of what you know. So everyone is responsible to act on what they know. So if you see that slippery slope, don't go sliding down it. But now someone who's already sliding down it, I just want them to hold on to a rock or some, as they're slipping down that slope, just hold on to something to prevent yourself from slipping more. But it means you're going to have to meet them in the middle of the slope. And for someone who's at the bottom, I just want to make sure that they don't crash and break their bones and die. So I will try to catch them in terms of where we need to be. So you even need to have different scholars, different da'is, different mentors, different people who are there at different levels of that game, in that slope, in order to say, all right, you people who know what you're doing, you guys stay right up there. Because you're working down here in the middle doesn't mean that you're saying that those people from the top have to come down. No, this is where you need that diversity of voices. There were some scholars whose entire thing was just being in the street with the poor in that area. There were other scholars who would minister to the intellectuals. There were other scholars who were just embedded in armies because military people needed their own type of dawah. So if we're going to talk about, people here who are listening are concerned with deen. So we have to understand that we need to understand who we're talking to at what point and what is good for that, what's in the best interest of that person. When you think like that and not what I want, then I think you can stop people. You can bring people up from whatever level they're at. And you can tell other people, because of your own example, that doesn't mean I have to slide down. Allah.
Allah Ta'ala. That's a beautiful answer. And I think that, culture is, naturally a site of uncomfortability and tension. I think, the
Definitely.
best art, even the best scholarly work, it unsettles you. I think that we have a way that I think is a bit anarchological. We read instead of understanding what those works meant. Instead of understanding what those works meant at the time they were authored. So when Imam Ghazali wrote the Ihya, that was a scathing critique of the intellectual culture of his time, right? He literally skewered the intellectuals of his time. And I can imagine that for people embedded in that intellectual culture, that must have been an uncomfortable read. Like, right? Like he just cut my legs off at the knee. Let me see 1 second. Go ahead. But go to the next question. Shaykh Abdullah, you can take the next question. My wife is screaming like the kids are doing.
Yeah, I'm hearing my kids jumping upstairs on the bed. Alhamdulillah, Bismillah. Okay, any questions? Bismillah.
I don't see any additional questions right now.
No worries. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah.
If there's anything you wanted to add on that point, you can go ahead and.
Yeah, no, I just think one of the beautiful things, subhanAllah, about the culture creation that's happening now here is that we, alhamdulillah, things are moving forward. I think that, you see the artists now who are kind of bringing the deen in their own way into their own art forms. And I think that we do have to be cognizant of the fact that we cannot make people feel like they're not Muslim because they're not following everything 100%. I think that's a very important thing. This kind of, Dr. Jackson mentioned something in one of his lectures, although Ustadh Ubaydullah will know this better. He calls it the new fundamentalism, right? The new fundamental. You have to feel like you're right. You have to feel like what I'm doing is the truth and the only truth. That type of thing you don't see when you look at other, civilizations, and I refer back to the subcontinent civilization, like Mughal civilization and so on, because that's my background. You see so many people doing things that are questionable Islamically and yet incorporating elements of Islam into their art, right? So they felt so confident to be Muslim that they would even say something that's kind of quite risky, but they feel close enough in one sense to Allah that they feel like Allah will forgive me for it. But, or in one sense, like, I know I'm not as good, but I know I'm still a Muslim. And you see this now when you see some of these rappers or you see sports stars, doing things that are not exactly 100%. And we have learned as a community to not cut everybody down in what they're doing, right? Which is a cultural shift. It is a cultural shift. Certain things have entered now, and I think that's a sign of maturity in our community where we're learning to, okay, not everything's going to be black and white. And there is going to be an athlete or an artist or an actor who doesn't do everything 100% halal, but we celebrate the aspects of religion that are also appealing to other people at that level. So whether it's an MMA fighter who has a huge appeal to a lot of people, because of his Islam, who need to see it that way, And I think, alhamdulillah, by and large, the scholars now, the younger generation of scholars, are doing a great job embracing it. I think the only place where there's those obstacles is the online comment section, and that's just going to keep, the dogs bark and the caravan rolls on. But alhamdulillah, I think we're doing much, much better.
القافلة تسير والكلاب تنبح. That doesn't even right. But no, I want to give you the final word here, mashallah. And this has been, it doesn't even seem like we've been conversing for an hour and a half because it's just
has it been, subhanallah.
It's just flowing. It's just flowing. But I want to give you a final word here. I thought the choice of topic, and we have, mashallah, an amazing team at ALIM, Sister Aisha Darbol, Sister Sabria Shah. We have an amazing team. And if I'm forgetting anybody, charge it to my head and not my heart. But I thought this was a great topic of discussion. I thought you were a great person to present about it. So thinking about culture, thinking about the Seerah, you have the final word. Please, Shaykh Abdullah, take us home, inshallah.
No, subhanallah, we're all in the journey. The home is with Allah, we're all in that journey. It's just an honor for me to have this dialogue with you, especially as a first interface with you after just briefly seeing you many, many years ago, almost 2 decades ago, in a place we almost forgot now, and Sister Aisha, Sister Sabria, whoever else organized this, people who are watching, there are people behind the scenes, alhamdulillah, who made this happen. I just think in the idea of culture, one thing I'll leave us with, like a story, right? And it's one of my favorite stories of the Prophet ﷺ. And we're talking about art. And there are times where, subhanAllah, through young girls, the idea of art has come through the Seerah so often, through this idea of young girls singing. When the Prophet ﷺ first enters Medina, and he's walking through the streets with armed men of the Ansar who are escorting him, to try to see where he's going to stay. He sees these girls who are playing the duff on the side of the road to welcome him, sort of impromptu. And he stops everybody and he listens to what they're singing. And they say, Nahnu jiwar and Bani Najjar, Ya Habbada Muhammad Najjar. They said, we are the young girls of Banu Najjar, of the tribe of Najjar. How wonderful is it to have Muhammad as a neighbor? And he stopped and he said, do you love me? Do you people love me? And they said, Ay ya Rasulullah, we do. They said, yes, ya Rasulullah, we do. And he said, Allah knows that I love you. Allah knows that I love you. Allah knows that I indeed love you. He said that 3 times back. And this is the first time when I think about songs, when I think about art coming into the Muslim community from the time of the Seerah itself, I'm like, that's the earliest song or art form that I can actually remember or trace back in our books. And that's right in the beginning of his entrance into Medina, which is very, 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 very symbolic. And the Prophet stops, listens, appreciates, and gives love back. And he talks about that art being tied to love for him, love for Allah. And as you go along, in other times of the Seerah, there's sometimes where a young girl is singing something. She said, we have a prophet that knows what will happen tomorrow. He stopped her. He said, don't say that, but say the other stuff that you were saying. So their art has to be guided by prophetic love. And then there's times as well where he's listening to young girls singing nasheed. And some other companions, Umar says, hey, stop this. Are you guys playing the pipes of shaitan in front of Rasulullah, like to the near meaning? He's like, what are you guys doing? And what does the Prophet say? He says, stop, let them continue. Let the other people of the book know that we have some space in our religion. Let them know.
Allah.
It's like sending a message. When you enjoy yourself for the sake of Allah in a way that's wholesome, but there's an art form being expressed, it sends a message, not only within your community, it reverbs out to the others to know this is a broad, expansive religion. And this is, I think, what the message of Islam to people who are all over the world, and honestly, who knows, those reverberations hit me and you in some way, and we became Muslim by the grace of Allah. So this is where I think that the culture, the art, the seerah are inextricably linked, and we have to support that. And Jazakallah khairan. I spoke too long. Thank you so much for having me.
Froze at the end there.
Sorry, thank you so much for having me. And I just want to say, Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi wa sallam. Jazakallah khairan.
Jazakumullah kull khair. Wa khitamuhu misk. I won't say anything after that. Jazakumullah kull khair. Assalamu alaikum.
Barakallah.
Jazakallah khairan. Thank you all for joining us and engaging with us. We wanted to remind you again just to go to alimprogram.org. You can find the summer program registration there. You can find the book club registration there. Next week, we'll be reading Easy Good Deeds. And just continue to support ALIM throughout the month of Ramadan. Keep us in your du'as and on your list of organizations to support, inshallah. Jazakallah khairan, Shaykh Abdullah Misra and Ustadh Ubaydullah. It was a really wonderful discussion. Alhamdulillah.
Thank you. Jazakallah khairan. Thank you for having me.
Alhamdulillah.